Identity as we know it begins to form from the instant we take our first breath. We start off as a blank slate, an open book waiting to be written. Our early years are filled with first steps, first sights, and first discoveries. Each of these moments shapes us, adds a brushstroke to the canvas of our character. As we move through adolescence, the picture becomes more complex. Little by little, we become a mosaic, a multifaceted collage, a puzzle formed from the fragments of our life. There comes a day where we grasp the paintbrush ourselves. We realize that we need not be defined solely by circumstance, that we have the power to paint our own future. We awaken to find that we can reshape our identity. Our identity continues to evolve, but now as an intentional work of art, guided by our own hand. We are the artist and the masterpiece. It is time to step into a greater identity. This is the gateway to your alternate life.
Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to day 3 of identity work. I am just having the time of my life reading the stories in the comments in the group. I'm freaking out. I'm loving the way you're telling these stories. Like I'm completely obsessed with the whole thing. The breakthroughs, the way you guys are showing up is so meaningful. I feel like I've watched 100 movies in 2 days. So I want to ask you a question. In your own experience of what's happening right now, like in you writing your story, do you feel like the way you wrote this, the way you contemplated this, the way you researched this, like, do you feel this is different than any other time you've ever told your story before? Your becoming, the way you gathered the information for this, does this feel different than the way you usually feel when you describe your life? What would be the biggest thing that's different? Like how does it feel different when you look at it this way? Lighter. I like that. Light. It feels like art. It feels lighter. No need to prove anything. Limitless, empowered, freeing. It's like deserving. There's meaning, magic, the opposite of what I usually feel. Things are possible now. Safe. It matters. Possibility. It feels more truthful, magical, liberating. It feels open, takes me out of victim mode, crystalline, fun, poetic, grateful, gratitude. I care, joy, feels like a movie, letting go of needing to prove anything. It feels creative, like I got the memo. No shame, expansive, I matter, worthiness. It feels true. And for some, they're still, like I can see here, I feel still afraid. The casualness of taking off. I understood the assignment, strength and brave. It was painful, responsible, calm, and stress-free, freedom, relief. Okay, so one of the things that I want to bring forward with the power of writing a story this way is that it's just the truth. It's just like, this is what happened. And it's wild how a life in the end, when you just live it, there will be the truth of what your life was. And that will be enough. So often when we're trying to explain the way our life is right now, we alter the truth with our feelings a little bit, either to validate our experience that things suck, or to color it a little more colorful than it is out of fear that our story isn't good enough. And so both of those things are things that start to warp our identity, because either way, we start to feel like we're not sure who we are. Are we the version that we kind of dismiss and make worse than it is, or are we the version that we need to polish up to make better? The real truth of who we are becomes the hardest identity to actually grasp. It feels like that's never the thought we have, is to just tell the truth, just to say it what it is, because it feels either not enough, or it feels like too much, or it feels like something else. So in the way I asked you to write the story, it's just the truth, and there is pain. My gosh, I read stories that took my breath away. But at the end of the day, what we really found, and I think most of us, if not all of us, can agree on this, is that what we saw was extraordinary fate, extraordinary odds being, defied, extraordinary storylines, either just miraculous simplicity that's like, that's insanely, how on earth did it happen so perfectly? And sometimes the complexity of like, every single thing about this was an almost not. So how did it end up happening? Every single story has an essence of that. And so our story, our own lives are going to be like that. There's going to be moments where the simplicity of it is almost laughable, where you're like, so I said I wanted this, and then the next day it showed up on my doorstep. Same as, my grandmother going to see the seer, the woman who told her you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger and your life will change forever. And she walked out of there and bumped into my granddad. Like, sometimes the simplicity is just too funny. You just can't make this stuff up. But then other times it's like, wait. So my mom, who was literally the kid who would never leave her mom's bedside, somehow gets a bubble and decides to go to Canada, meets my dad in a nightclub, and stays in Canada for the rest of her life. Like, how does that happen? My dad that was not even supposed to make it, the doctor said there is 0 chance, and he made it. So how does that happen? Our life's going to have those moments too. So why this is so important, and why I wanted to start the program with this, is that a lot of times how we see our identity is that we should know what's coming. That's how we describe having a solid identity. We know what the plan is. We know what's coming. We know what we're supposed to do. And everything's working. But like, none of that happened for you to be here. So why do we imagine that that's going to be the way for us? Now, sometimes it will, and that's great, but most of the time it won't. So that's not what our identity is. Our identity is basically how we relate to ourselves as the truth of who we are. And so you could say, who I am is someone who is a mess, just because you don't know what's coming. But you could also say, who I am is a person who's constantly creating her life one day at a time. Same circumstances, different identity. So seeing so many different people kind of show what it took for them to even exist, and who their grandparents were, and their great-grandparents, and their parents, and how they got here. It just goes to show, like, it all matters so much in one sense. And in another sense, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, does it matter whether they knew what they were doing or not? No, you still ended up here. Did it matter whether they had a plan or not? No, you still ended up here. Did it matter whether there was a war? Did it matter whether there was a pandemic or a Spanish flu? Did it matter whether, did it matter whether they were married? No, you were a child from a second marriage. Doesn't matter. None of it matters. You're here somehow. It doesn't matter. So what if we had that kind of trust in the things we're supposed to create on this planet? That as long as we're really engaged in our identity, as long as we're like, I'm the one that is living out this life and I'm showing up for it. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm showing up for this. I'm curious about this. I'm here for this. Magic things get to happen. Because all that happened with all these stories is people showed up, made decisions, and did things. And then stuff happened. So the stuff's going to happen. The identity is Who are you when the stuff happens? That's what changes things. Not what happens. Who are you when the stuff happens? Some of the most extraordinary breakthroughs that I read in this group are people who shared things like, I thought I didn't matter, but contemplating this work, I realized my 17-year-old mother decided to keep me against all odds. That is a brave girl that makes that choice. Who are you when it happens? Are you brave? Are you like, this wasn't part of the plan, but I can adapt. That's who I am. Or are you like, trust me to make a mistake and to not know, and this was not supposed to be? When we look at the way we handle things, a lot of the time, the issue is not what happens to us. The issue is the way we handle what happened. We've seen so many forks in the road during this class already. So many stories where it's like, holy wow. Some people who stayed, some people who left, some people who fled, some people who died, some people who, like, the choices, the decisions, the pain, everything. People just had to survive, just had to move forward. It's not always just going to be simple, but miracles are going to happen. So I want to ask you this. Who here, in being in this group and in reading other people's stories, realized that you actually had a breakthrough about your own life through someone else's story? Like something someone else said made you realize something about your parents, your grandparents, yourself, your storyline. Like you read their stuff and you were like, oh my gosh, this is a part of me I never realized. Look how many people are saying yes. So on another question, if you wondered even for a second before you wrote what you wrote, if it would matter or not, if you had the tiniest little thought, like, watch me be the only person that nobody reads this thing, or does it even matter that I'm writing this so much, like who cares? If you had the tiniest thought about that, say me. If you were like, am I really gonna write this whole thing? It doesn't really matter, no one will read it, maybe I don't post it. Okay, look at this. So just as an example of how much we can matter on the simplest things and how much we can overcomplicate things on the simplest things. Some of you doubted whether you should post or not. And some of you were entirely moved by someone else's story. So just knowing your story, just knowing you, just hearing you, just you showing up for stuff in life changes people. But we don't put that in our identity box. We think that's just something that kind of happens by accident. It isn't. And I hear you, like some people here, like I still haven't posted mine yet. There's still something like, does it matter enough? Do I matter enough? Will it make a difference to me? I don't even really care. My story is weird. All the things that I said on day one would probably happen. But for so many people, just reading your story made them realize some things. So I like to see life in this way. Coaching containers for me feel like an ecosystem. They feel like a representation of the real world. How we behave in a space like this is very similar to how we behave in the outside world. We have the same fears, the same thing. It's just another thing in our real life. So why wouldn't it be the same? But the things that hold you back here hold you back out there. The things you break free from in here, you start to shape out there as well. It's kind of magical like that. And so when you don't think you matter out there, the chances of you coming in here and doing something that would make you have to believe that you matter, like, but if you do it, there's a breakthrough in here and out there. So I